Okay, good morning. It's 1 minute past the hour that we're meant to start, so let me just get started straight away. But before we get into our session this morning, I'm just going to make a small administrative-like announcement here. A lot of you here are familiar with this assembly system that we're using here. So while you're all ready and seated, you can have your voice heard in this session as well by participating via Wisembly and Twitter. If you haven't already done so, connect to the OECD hotspot and then to Wisembly, check out the screens or the postcards on your seats on how to connect. I'm sure they're all there. Go ahead and take a moment to do that now. And as you can see, we are here in Amphitheater 3, so please connect to app.wisembly.com/OECD3. Okay. Now, the key questions will be sent to me on this tablet that I have here on my lap by the social media team, which I may put to the panel. All you need to do is to use that Wisembly and your Twitter with this session's numbered hashtag, that is hashtag OECD3, and your questions and comments will show up on the big screen, so no bad words. And also, you can make your comments, you can ask questions, you can vote, or you can like others' comments, and all of this will, I hope, enrich this debate, and you will not only hear the discussion on stage, but also see what those around you seated in this amphitheater are thinking about this topic this morning. All right, that is my administrative announcement. And I'm going to get straight into our session today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the OECD Forum session on inclusive entrepreneurship. I am An Cha-ki. I am the Director of Global Affairs at the 중앙일보, which is the flagship newspaper of the Chungang Media Network. Chungang, obviously being a Korean word, is probably not something that you've heard often. Well, the Chungang Media Network is Korea's largest media group. We have 25 companies, and other than media, we have recently acquired business resort, leisure resorts, and we also have a big cinema chain in Korea as well, because media is sort of not growing so much anymore, we feel. So we've decided to branch out into other areas as well. I started off in the 90s as a television reporter and was the anchor of our main news at a station called Arirang TV, which is seen around the world. And I was also the weekend anchor at JTBC, which was responsible for the whole scandal that broke out in Korea at end of last year. We found the tablet that had incriminating evidence regarding the former president. Anyway, I did that until 3 years ago when I decided that I really needed, I'm not as young anymore, and I really needed a sustainable lifestyle. So here I am being the Director of Global Affairs. So I'm now on the business side, the management side. It is my pleasure and my honor to moderate this panel with a very distinguished lineup of speakers who will help us better understand what is happening, excuse me, now to push inclusive entrepreneurship forward in their respective line of work. So over the next hour and 20 minutes or so, we hope to try to take away some best practices and policy recommendations in our efforts to ensure that we're not headed in the wrong direction as far as entrepreneurship is concerned. As you know, the digital sphere has opened up the door for alternative voices and initiatives to gain an audience, and has provided a great means to present creative ways to bring about social change, and thus it provides unprecedented opportunities to some of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged groups in society, from here in France to Finland, all the way to Australia, and also my home country, Korea. So let me introduce my excellent panel members here. Please give each of them a round of applause when I do their brief introduction. Let me start with Chiara Condi, who's right at the end here. She started off as an excelling student at Harvard, where she directed the only student-run homeless shelter. After that, she moved on to work at EBRD on its gender program, and now is the founder of Led by Her, which helps women who suffer from violence to rebuild their jobs and their lives around an entrepreneurial project. Is that right? Yes. Okay, round of applause for Chiara, please. Thank you. And next to Chiara is Nicola Hazel. Did I pronounce that right? It is Hazel. Hazel. Dear all. Okay. Well, I stand corrected. Nicola Hazel. Nicola Hazel comes to us with a wealth of experience in media and public affairs, as well as politics and TV news, right? Okay. She made the leap from into startup last year, joining innovation group Blue Chili, where she leads the development of a new program, I like this word, turbocharging female leadership in the startup economy, right? Okay, round of applause for Nicola, please. And the only gentleman in our group this morning, lucky him, yeah, this is Ape Poyavirta. Did I get it right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, I'll practice more. He is the founder and chief evangelist of Funzi. Funzi is a Finnish company that provides a mobile learning and information service with a focus on emerging markets. Ape is a sought-after entrepreneurship coach and a lecturer, and is also an international patent inventor. In fact, he invented the mobile app in 2003? Yes. All right. A round of applause.
All the time you waste is my fault.
Round of applause for Ape. Thank you, Ape. And last but not least is the beautiful Roxanne Varza. She is the director of Station F, which is the largest startup campus in the world, set to launch end of this month.
End of this month.
Okay, wonderful. She works with the French government on digital matters and is well noted as one of the 30 women under 30 in tech by Business Insider. She also joins us with experience at several European startups, right? And is a prolific writer on the startup industry as well. Okay, round of applause for Roxanne.
Can I just add?
Sure.
I wanted to add that under 30 thing is from a few years ago.
Okay, you still look under 30, but so no problem. Okay, well, welcome to you all. Over the last several years, we have been getting some statistics which are not also good. Now, OECD unemployment levels have hit a peak unseen in a generation, and inequalities of income and wealth have risen to their highest levels in some 30 years. This is a worrisome trend, of course, and obviously there's a great discussion on what must be done to turn things around. But we're here this morning because we believe inclusive entrepreneurship can be a way to achieve sustainable growth. Now, my panel of experts this morning, being in the field and meeting with the real people who are looking to start their own business and to thrive, this must have really presented the case for inclusive entrepreneurship for yourselves. Your comment, please. Could we start with Nicola?
Sure. I guess the focus and the belief in the potential of entrepreneurship comes from when you see people coming from an environment that isn't atypical and using entrepreneurship as a tool to create great change. You know, entrepreneurship, and in my area where I work with tech startups, it's all about experiments. It's all about people who have a passion for solving big problems in the world and for leveraging technology as a vehicle to do that. And what we've seen in our work in Australia at Blue Chili is that while there is huge opportunity for creating globally scalable impact, in the ecosystem for startups in our country, and it's certainly similar to many parts of the world, women were missing in action. We weren't seeing enough women knocking down our door to want to start and build and create incredible tech companies with us. And right across our ecosystem, at the time we saw that women were making up around 1 in 5 startup founders. It's slowly eking up, but we're still looking at a very small percentage of people who are founding tech startups being women. So we started the She Starts program with the clear objective of changing this, and to do so in a way that at its core was very tangible action, investing in and working with female founders to build female-led tech companies. But of course, to move the needle takes more than the investment in what was 10 companies. It actually needs to drive a new narrative around that. So by investing in a group of women and then sharing their stories and championing them as case studies for what can be achieved, we've actually been able to drive what is in a way a movement around female leadership in tech and innovation that affects not only other women who are considering a career in this space or the opportunities in this space, but also affects women right across the economy, women working in large corporates who want to drive innovation within and can see the potential for their leadership to have an impact. The reality is, if we don't do this, we're missing out. Diversity in leadership, women-led companies drive better bottom lines. The research and the evidence is absolutely in. This is not just a social imperative, it is indeed an economic imperative, and therefore the potential of investing in women has great repercussions for all of us.
Ape, we already have a comment here that this is a panel about inclusive entrepreneurship, but it's with 3 women and 1 man. I think you need to weigh in here.
Yeah, so the way I see things is, see, I'm simple, stupid, slow, and stubborn. It's just like, those are 4 like defining characteristics of my personality. And a few years back, when I was looking at the planet, I started asking questions about what is life all about? Where is the planet heading? And then I decided that there has to be one thing that if we would solve one thing, because I can do only one thing. You know, see, I'm a guy, I'm a man, I'm a simple person. And I went to people who are wise people, scientists, researchers, statisticians, you know, people who should be in the know. And all of this talk led me to one simple statement. There's one thing that we have to fix. The thing that we need to fix is we need to get the women in the sub-Saharan Africa to become entrepreneurs and create middle class into those economies in their services sector. And the only tool to do that is the mobile device, because that's the device everybody uses, period. If I do that, then the rest will follow and should follow, because there's no other option. There is no other option.
So follow up on that comment from
Roxanne.
Assembly. I actually have to congratulate whoever put this panel together, because I have been to so many events where people think that an inclusive panel to talk about diversity is putting 4 women on stage to talk about what is it to be a woman in tech. And I'm so happy that you are here, because I think actually we won't advance at all women in the workplace without the support and the help and the comprehension of men around the subject. So I actually think whoever noted that as a comment is absolutely right.
All right. Chiara, in your line of work, you've obviously felt that this is where you need to go, right, in your mission.
Yeah, and it's very funny because I've been challenging people recently who have programs for entrepreneurs, for, you know, coding schools, etc. And, you know, they always say, well, I have people applying, but I just don't have women. They're just not applying. And I say, well, what are you going to do about that? And the thing is that it comes into this kind of gray no man's zone, because they aren't getting the applicants, but who is putting those women up to speed so they can apply? And I think this is the big question on, you know, for this panel on bridging divides, is who's building those bridges and who's responsible? Because I feel right now it's a hot potato that we're throwing around, but nobody is really fully taking responsibility for that. And I think I've come back, and I've seen, you know, we haven't fully acknowledged culturally how much we need women programs, and to bring women up to speed. I mean, we've had, I don't know, 5,000, 20,000 years of oppression, and in the last century, you know, my grandfather was born in 1912. In 1919, women had the right to vote. My father was born in 1960. He was already 14 years old when women could own get credit on their own without a husband. How can you start a business without credit? I mean, 1973, women can have an abortion. You know, first female CEO of a Fortune 500 company, Catherine Graham. All these things, and I'm growing up with the, you know, I was born in 1986, you know, grew up with the floppy disk, and all these, you know, and with more role models like Oprah, Sarah Blakely, you know, Hillary going into politics and almost becoming president of the United States. The world is changing very quickly, and you know, and like if I have a daughter one day, you know, she's going to be coding Python when she's like 5, and you know, she's going to be dressing like Ada Lovelace for Halloween, and it's going to be it's a rapidly changing world. But we have to understand where we're coming from. This is just the last century, you know, and so we expect that women are going to become a startup, you know, we're going to get 50% of women in startups and 50% of women entrepreneurs just like that. When it took like thousands of years of oppressions, you know, 1 century of work to get us where we are, and we're not, so that's why I get a lot of backlash when I say, well, we have to create women-only programs that are understanding the needs of women and why they're not accessing these tools, so that they can get to the step where they can have the access. And I think that's being realistic, and it's being concrete, and I think that we have to have a very honest conversation around that.
So it's a whole comprehensive issue here that we're dealing with, right? Now, let's focus in on that digitalization part, the digital part. That has obviously given women great opportunity to be able to do what they are dreaming of, right? I think you've already all touched upon that, but how can policymakers work to help women access this digital world and to overcome this barrier that we perceive to be there for women? Would you like to start with that, Alpe?
First of all, I wish that the policymakers would understand digital. I think that one of the big things is that our societies have been built on a false sense of causality. You know, we think that there are processes that start somewhere and end up somewhere. And that has led to our societies being totally reactive. Digital is totally proactive. We create the things that we create now, and they're available everywhere to everyone like this. Now, that's something that's never happened before. That's why the rules are going to change, and I believe, and where I come from, you know, Finland, the best place in the world. In my immediate surrounding, I have beautiful, wonderful women who are shaping things, such as Rails Girls. If you know what Rails Girls is, it's an open source concept available on the web. If you want to run a Rails Girls event and teach girls, women to code, it's cool, but you can use it also for guys. Because where I come from, and where I want I want to see the world grow up into, is a world where everyone is inclusive, regardless of what sex, gender, what you present. And I see mobility and digital being actually a tool that could enable it. And I would be really interested in here, because I love France. The French environment is really important for us in the European cultural setting. It's hearing, when you've been building this thing of yours, have you had to include the women? Because where I come from, women are always included, because we wouldn't be there without the women.
I'll just jump on the end of that. Actually, so Station F the whole premise of this massive startup campus that we're building, yes, it's huge, but actually a lot of it is to make entrepreneurship more accessible and more diverse from all angles. So we've been talking a lot about women, but we're also looking at bringing more international profiles to the ecosystem in Paris. We're looking at obviously having a large representation of women. Actually, it happened very naturally, which I think a lot of us in the room are here to talk about why are there not more women, but actually the number of women, at least from where I'm sitting and where I'm looking in the French ecosystem, has been going up quite rapidly over the last few years. And Paris actually is ranked very high with respect to a number of other cities, ahead of London, ahead of Tel Aviv, if you look at the number of women creating startups. And we're also looking at bringing in people from underprivileged backgrounds that you don't see starting companies today and that don't see entrepreneurship actually as an option. They're becoming Uber drivers and delivery people, but they're not actually starting startups themselves. And so the whole point with Station F would be to make entrepreneurship a lot more accessible to those people. But I also wanted to jump onto the back of something that Chiara said earlier, because I totally agree with something that she said about how things are actually represented and portrayed to women, about making them much more I guess kind of more appropriate in speaking their language, because I also founded or co-founded a group to support women in entrepreneurship in France about 6 or 7 years ago, and then I also did the same group in the UK. We had very different reactions to founding the same exact initiative. We had France that loved it, and men and women came together and they said, we totally need to have more women in tech. And in the UK, we had this reaction of kind of like, well, we're women, we can do it ourselves. We don't want to be reached out to just because we're women. We want to be reached out to because we're good. And I totally get that argument. And so I think my message to policymakers is also to keep that in mind, because sometimes I see policies that are a little bit like, let's just get the women in there because we need the women in there. I think we have to start much, much earlier, and we have to also keep in mind that the dialogue that we're having, it's not always the same dialogue that you have to men and to women around the same topic. And so with my organization, Start Her, we actually had introduction to coding classes, and a lot of people tell me there's no women in developers and we can't find them, and where are they? They're not interested. And so we opened a session, it was free learn to code classes open to anyone, but we happened to be a women's organization, so we had 80% of people who signed up were women, and we actually found that it was a very different kind of experience for them, because the people who were teaching were actually women, and somehow that kind of changed how comfortable they were around the topic. So I think we have to kind of also keep that in mind. I think education is a huge component, and I also think that we have to think about the format and how can we actually make it much more appealing to women.
Yes, they're fighting for the mic. Yes, Nicola, why don't you go ahead?
This to me speaks to the topic of how do you actually design for diversity in a policy setting and in a programmatic setting, and also in a communications space. So in particular, Chiara spoke about the fact that people were saying, oh, but the women don't apply. So it's almost like it's beholden upon the women need to change because they're just not applying. At Blue Chili, we turned that on its head with She Starts. Instead of saying, the women need to apply, how do we fix the women so that they come and apply to what we're delivering now? We built something and designed it to communicate in a very different way. So when we opened applications for our program, which is a venture-backed startup accelerator for tech founders, for non-tech founders to build tech companies, we didn't say that. We said to the people of Australia, we have a program for female-led startups, not female only, but female-led to the point of diversity, but focusing on the leadership. And we said, do you have a bold idea for solving a big problem in the world? Are you passionate about fixing a problem where you can leverage technology to have impact in the world? And when we did that, we launched with a video that had the faces of women of all ages, cultural backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, different lifestyles and careers. We had people from creatives, people who demonstrated a technology flavor, but also didn't. Athletes, people who could see themselves no matter who you were. And therefore the message that we sent out there, instead of having crickets when we put out the applications, we had 800 women register to apply in 4 weeks. That was more than double any program that had been run before, and it was only open to 50% of the population. So the hypothesis was actually, if we sell the story differently and we engage with women and we design a campaign that listens to what women are interested in, and to do so, we actually spent time talking to female founders who had come into this ecosystem and asked them, why did you come into this ecosystem? Was it because you were looking for an accelerator? Was it because you were looking for venture capital, or you saw yourself as a startup? And the answer was no. Most of them said, I never knew what a startup was. I just heard about this opportunity to solve a problem, and that made me think maybe this was an opportunity for me. So when we design the way we speak to our communities, we need to think about how we change language and recognize that there is this depth of talent and passion and capability out there if we work at every step of the pipeline to change that. And I think the one other point I would make on design in a policy setting is it's not enough for governments to say, we want to fund in our big innovation budget, we're going to have this component to fund programs for women. That's great, and it's important to inject into that space. But you also need to say, well, what are we doing in our funding for all programs to ensure that it is non-negotiable that the deliverers of those programs are designing for diversity? If you inject funding into some programs for women and help here, while everyone else still runs programs that inherently end up being filled with men, then you're not changing anything. So you have to be systemic.
Right, that's a very good point. And I think we had some comments here coming up asking, yes, I was going to hand it right to you, but yeah, it was asking, give us a precise definition of what we mean by inclusive entrepreneurship. That word inclusive, I mean, are you just talking about women, but Nicola has just pointed out, it's not just about women. It's about including everyone in the process. Anyone who has been disadvantaged to this point, where they were excluded from opportunities and whatnot, from running their own businesses or realizing their vision. Chiara, could you give us a sort of a comprehensive understanding of what we're talking about when we're saying, you know, we'd really like to promote inclusive entrepreneurship?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that jumping on what Nicola said, I think what proves that she had 800 applications is that there is an interest among women to become entrepreneurs, and probably that interest, I'm guessing, is under, you know, other underrepresented populations also have that same interest, but the structures that we currently have, or at least are not enough, that are adapted, are not enough to support all those people who want to become entrepreneurs. You know, we saw the same thing when we organized a hackathon for our women entrepreneurs. There were a lot of women entrepreneurs who wrote, and they said they wanted to participate in the hackathon. I'm just like, there are 1 million hackathons in Paris, you know, why do you have to come? But it's like they want to be at a hackathon with our philosophy, with the way we do things, with the way we approach women entrepreneurship. And I think that that can be transferred to a lot of different types of entrepreneurs who are underrepresented currently in the entrepreneurship population. And then another thing that I want to say, and I think we should not miss out on this in policy, is that it's also that women entrepreneurs don't, I'm talking just about women entrepreneurs because that's what I work on, sorry. But women entrepreneurs do not, you know, grow under sort of glass bells. They grow in like ecosystems, right? So it's about how the whole other ecosystem supports them, thinks about them. You know, a lot of research in the Oxford Review about how, you know, we see entrepreneurship as masculine value. Another thing that is really important is that we also need to think about what other policies around women there are, and this is why I think we need to fight for the place of women in society and not just women entrepreneurs or women in tech startups alone, because a lot of women are missing out on these opportunities because there is no subsidized childcare, because, you know, and sometimes we're not open to these real life discussions that are very, very important. And it shows, you know, and it affects startups, not just women entrepreneurs, because there is research, and, you know, the Kauffman Foundation talks a lot about this, about how women in STEM are much less likely to start a business if they have a child, and for men it has absolutely no effect. So I think we should talk about that.
Okay, we will talk about that, but definitely, most definitely. I think we all have experience with that. But Ape, I want to go to you because we have a couple of comments about not just about marginalized groups as entrepreneurs, as well as customers. And you have experience with that with migrants, right?
Yeah. Mm. I'm afraid of these comments. First of all, the interesting word here was design. So when we started designing our service, we actually designed the service based on science and research and data and needs and all that, design thinking. Not like policymakers who create things based on their, I don't know what. So we actually designed it. The interesting thing is that actually, from data, like the Australians say, I love it. From data, it's like dada. From dada, we see that our design works. How do I know it? Well, we went to Iraq because Iraq is in shambles and somebody has to do something about it. So we ourselves, with our own, we're a poor startup, no money, funding needed, thank you. We actually went and started campaigns focusing on delivering Arabic language entrepreneurial course in Iraq. And after running it for a year, we've now had 1.5 million people go through the campaign, and then hundreds of thousands of people start the course, and tens of thousands have actually completed the course without us being present in Iraq. The interesting thing is, it's 54% women, 46% men. And it's only by design. We have apparently designed something that works for both genders in a setting that is totally, as you know, Iraq, it's not a simple place. It's not an easy area to be working in. So design is really important. Understanding the needs of the population, that's why the community-driven approach is of core, you get peer-to-peer support, you get women supporting women, and us men supporting women as equals, and also understanding, fighting for their rights. I tend to say that I'm an active, aggressive feminist, because I wish I wouldn't have to defend women. Likewise, I do not wish I need to defend people. My first boss sat in a wheelchair. So I grew up understanding that everybody has guts, everybody has dreams, and it's our job is to fight for their rights to be able to become the people to realize their dreams. I think that's, for me, inclusive entrepreneurship.
Wow. Yeah, a round of applause here, I think, is deserved. Yeah. That I think really hits the core of why we are here today. I mean, so many people, disadvantaged people, have been marginalized because the system has preferred the elites or people who have already had access. So the gap between the haves and the have-nots, or the wealth income, has just been aggravated over the decades. And that is what we really need to address. But now let's get to the point of this lack of access to, let's say, finance and investment and entrepreneurship skills. These are most often cited as the biggest problems in the biggest stumbling blocks to business creation. In your line of work, do you also agree that those are the factors that are the most problematic, or do you see that there are other issues out there that need more attention? Who would like to go first here?
I guess I can talk to this in terms of, I look at 3 key pillars for women in the tech startup space, and there are elements of this that apply right across the entrepreneurship environment. And I mean, it's important to understand we talked about this earlier, there is entrepreneurship for survival, people who are seeing entrepreneurship as a key to often microfinance, to opportunities to survive. And then there's entrepreneurship for innovation. And there are different policy levers you need to pull in both of those different areas. But when I look at the 3 pillars that affect women in the startup environment, there is the technical skills barrier is seen as a #1 challenge, right? The fact that women in the world are grossly underrepresented in computer science degrees and coming out with technology degrees and skill sets, the digital skill set, that literacy. In what we do with our program, we work with non-technical founders to build tech companies, and we bring that tech experience to the table so that they can actually get an MVP and start to get out there and figure out how to operate in the world of technology. So there are ways of addressing those barriers. The second set of barriers is cultural and structural. And this is incredibly linked to all of the things that Chiara is speaking about in terms of cultural barriers, such as risk-taking behavior. In a lot of developed countries in particular, risk-taking behavior is is absolutely not ingrained in women. You got to do the right thing and say the right thing at the right time and wait your turn. Therefore, going out there and being bold and taking risks is not ingrained in the way that we are raised. The structural issues such as access to childcare, access to paid parental leave, the massive gender pay gap, which means women's ability to raise savings to be able to quit a job and take a big idea and take a big leap and a big risk and turn it into an amazing company, is impeded. And the confidence gap is also a very significant challenge for a lot of women in having the confidence to not be 60% sure that maybe you've got an idea, or like men are proven to be happy to go out with, but actually to be 100% sure before you put yourself out there. The final area is visual. And this is the fact that when we look at the tech industry, we don't see women in there. There are a few shining lights, but for the majority, we see blokes in hoodies and sneakers playing ping pong and drinking Red Bull. And therefore, if you're a woman with a great idea and you're thinking about the potential in this space, let alone a young girl, you're not seeing yourself. So role models is a really key barrier. The financial piece sits in that structural area. It's not just whether or not you can save your own funds, but also what happens when you're pitching for funds, and that links to confidence. So you can see how all of these different areas are connected. If you don't have confidence to pitch for capital, then you're going to be affected by the ability to then raise the funds to start a startup. And we also see that when you have female investors, they are more likely to be great coaches of female startup founders as well. So women are also underrepresented in that space, another structural challenge and barrier. Do you see the same?
Yeah, I actually wanted to jump on with kind of another element, which is network, which I think is somewhat overlooked because we all just assume that people, you know, can meet people and they can find the people that they need to get what they need done. They can recruit the people that they need. They can find the investors that they need. But I think we've also seen a lot of very prominent, for example, Silicon Valley investors come out and say, well, the model that works for me is investing in an MIT or a Stanford grad that is a male, that has male colleagues, that they all look like me and they have the same degree as me, and we just keep investing in this model because venture capital is not a science, but hey, it's almost a science if you do it that way. And I think that is a terrific way to overlook tons of people from other backgrounds and profiles, and potentially tons of also very different businesses. And that's also maybe why some of you in the entrepreneur field like me feel like we just keep seeing the same mobile apps and websites and things like that coming out every single year.
That's the conscious bias as well as the unconscious bias, right? It's the investor who sits there and sees a young man standing in front of him and goes, you're just like I was at your age. Damn it, I'm going to give you a go. They don't see that when a young woman stands up in front of them and pitches a global database for shark scientists to share and collaborate shark samples, which happens to be one of the startups in my program.
Right.
That is not your average Silicon Valley pitch.
You, Kiara, are not the obvious, typical tech startup person, right?
Yeah.
So how was it for you?
Well, a few things. So I think that one of the things is also when we're talking about this bias is that there are also a lot of women, because usually we solve problems that are around us and that we experience and encounter in our real life. And a lot of women are creating companies for women, and all the investors are men. So you go and present to them something like to do with your period, and it's like they have no idea what it is, and they can't see the potential. They can't understand it. And I've heard a lot of tech startups talk about that. I also think that I hear a lot that the argument is access to finance. Women don't have access to finance, but it's really funny because then you go to like VCs and all the people who are financing in the angel networks, and they're saying we don't have any women applicants. So obviously, there is a problem there, and the problem is that not enough women are becoming entrepreneurs. So they're not taking the first steps, and we're trying to cure the end of the pipeline without taking care of the beginning. And so I think, and not being in specifically in the tech space, I think for tech and non-tech, we should work on creating programs that get women to take the first steps towards entrepreneurship. And I think that's what's really, really missing, because we really, really like to work with projects that are already formed and that, ideas. and we're not helping those ideas emerge, so we're never going to get that equality.
Chiara, you are a young American woman with a startup in France, here in Paris. We're interested in, what were the hardships? What was the most difficult thing that you experienced doing what you're doing now?
Well, finding money.
Finding money.
I have to say, I have to be honest, because I think that there's, and this is like something that we should be very open about, because I think that we like to say, that supporting women entrepreneurs is really important, inclusive entrepreneurship, etc. But who's going to pay for that? And that's a really, really big question, because if we want to make it a priority, we also have to give it the means. And we had a hackathon recently, and I mean, we could not find. We really struggle to find support. And all these companies sent their employees to work with us, etc. But it's really hard to find financial support, and it's really difficult because we're coming up with solutions, but we're not necessarily seeing the financial backing, even though everybody thinks that what you do is great.
Okay, we're going to revisit this question a little bit later on and try to address whose responsibility is it then? Is it the corporate sector's responsibility, or is it the government's responsibility to make inclusive entrepreneurship a bigger thing? But Ape, you had a point. Yeah, you wanted to make a comment.
Actually, I was deep in my thoughts because the panel is so good. I wanted to take a wider view of things. We work in places where things don't work that well, because coming from the mobile, it's easier for us to go into markets where the existing infrastructure doesn't work that well. So for example, in Jordan, we're seeing female university students, people who study and graduate from universities. I think that the number was 70% was women, and women who are working is 12 to 13%. Now, what happens to these? Where do they go? And there was a comment about what is the value of inclusion for the society. Well, I'm telling you that there's calculations, and they're found to be on the interwebs. If these women would be involved as entrepreneurs or even as employees in the society, the GDP would be growing through the roof.
24 trillion, I think.
Yes, we have figures. Do we, Nicola?
I think it's something like we would increase global GDP by up to $24 trillion if women's participation in the labour market was the same as that of men, and it's around that figure. I'd have to double check.
And then another comment, and I'm sort of trying to be interactive. Another comment was this role model. Well, I'm sitting here and I'm looking at these women, and I'm asking, what better role models would the world have than people who are building something? Entrepreneurship is not about the success at the end. Entrepreneurship is about embracing every hard step along the way. So the people who build things, the people who do things, the people who wake up in the middle of the night being afraid, they are the ones who are true entrepreneurs. And if they are women, may that be, but you four represent to me. You not included because somebody pays you a high salary, but these three, they're cool chicks.
Yes, we have lots of sleepless nights, let me tell you, even when my paycheck comes from our group's owner. Anyway, I think we have an exceptional audience here today, because the questions that are coming in are actually the questions that I've already drawn up. So excellent, excellent. So yes, does inclusive entrepreneurship bring added value? I think Nicola already gave you a specific figure on that. It does, right? Roxanne, how have you, in your company, how have you actually experienced inclusive entrepreneurship benefiting your particular company?
So my current company, it's maybe a little bit hard because we're not open yet. So we're opening Station F, which is the world's biggest startup campus, at the end of June. And as I mentioned earlier, with the startups that we'll be having on campus, we're really looking at making sure that diversity is a key element. It's actually kind of in the DNA of what we're doing. And I think probably what we've noticed so far, actually, is that my internal team is only 15 people to run this big thing. But we're 50% women, and we have people from all kinds of backgrounds. They have, I don't know how many passports they have. Essentially, the criteria was really just to come from the startup ecosystem and to have a strong understanding of startups. But it just turned out that we got 50% women and people from all over the world. And I think that has actually really helped our DNA going forward. When we're actually looking at startups, we're not just looking at, well, are we picking 10 companies that they all look the same? Of course, they're going to be successful, but we're also really looking at giving people a fair chance, giving them a fair platform, and what resources can we give them access to. And I think probably today we've spoken a lot about women, but one population that is just so underrepresented is people from underprivileged backgrounds, people that don't go to business school, they don't go to engineering school, they don't have MBAs, yet they want to become entrepreneurs. And today, yes, you have a lot of resources online and what have you, but a lot of people aren't even aware that entrepreneurship is an option for them. And I think that probably starts much earlier. That starts outside. I mean, in France at least, it's not in the big cities. It's actually in the banlieue. So I think we probably have to have a very different approach to how we reach those people and how we bring them into entrepreneurship. And the same also goes for overseas territory, where unemployment, especially with young populations, is exceptionally high. And if they would all just, get together and start companies, we'd probably have a very different situation.
We've seen this in Australia, where there have been a number of programs, one which I do some mentoring with for the refugee and migrant community. And those programs succeed when they're not held in the inner city. And these are, Catalyzer is a refugee and migrant business and entrepreneurship accelerator program that is literally going out into the far western suburbs of Sydney, where we have a higher refugee and migrant population, and creating an opportunity for individuals to come and learn those principles around entrepreneurship and to test out ideas and develop them. And we take the industry's best mentors. Our startup evangelist at Blue Chili, Alan Jones, is one of the advisors on this program, and he's out there spending time. This is a guy who's invested in incredibly successful tech startups and was the founder of Yahoo when it came to Australia. And so he's out there working with these entrepreneurs to support them in a community and an environment that is inclusive and accessible. And I think that's a real key, is inclusive and accessible. You have to have the combination of both. It's not enough to just have one. And when we look at, therefore, the same challenges in terms of women, you made a point earlier about the case studies of women in childcare and access to childcare. When we opened the She Starts program, I shared this anecdote yesterday, but one of the women who was selected into the top 20, she came to me straight away and said, "Thank you, that's great, but I don't think I can participate because I have to be there 2 days a week for 3 weeks, and I'm breastfeeding. And my husband works full time, so I'm guessing I have to say no to this amazing opportunity." And I just picked up the phone and said, "We have a porta cot, we have a breastfeeding room. If you have someone who wants to help out, they're welcome to work from our offices, and we'd love to have the baby in all the workshops if you're happy with that. Plus, you can leave early, you can do this bit online, we'll do this from a video call." And it was really easy, and yet she was shocked that that was even an option. So accessibility is a really important part of how you create entrepreneurial opportunities and entry points for people, regardless of what their circumstances and background are.
So obviously this lady took you up on all
She's
this
building a
great
company
package.
called Longevity in the She Starts program that's going to help all people to top up their retirement savings and particularly improve the gender gap in retirement savings for women.
Wow, bravo.
I wanted
Okay.
to actually just comment.
Thank you, bravo.
I definitely agree, and I think we're starting to see also a trend with, for example, conferences offering childcare services and things like that, where we traditionally haven't seen a lot of women being able to speak and attend and what have you. But also I think that people forget oftentimes that in the digital age, actually, we have a much more flexible work environment than we ever had before. People don't actually have to be necessarily in the office. They can work different hours, they can work whenever they want, they can work the weekend, they can work the night. So actually, it is a much more flexible option for women who do have children, and I do think think that that also needs to be a message that is well communicated. People who are looking for that flexibility. Today people think being an entrepreneur is all about, you know, creating an app and making billions, but actually it's also about having a much more flexible lifestyle as well that can also be very accommodating to people from different backgrounds.
Yes, Chiara?
Well, I think, you know, and often I think it's great what Station F is doing about inclusivity and looking at people who are very diverse, because I think that when you look at a lot of incubators, you see a lot of the same types of people. They all have degrees from the same schools. They kind of all look the same. And I think we forget that sort of access to entrepreneurship is not the same for everybody. And I know that we work with sort of population that is very it's quite far from this, and we bring them into top business schools, we expose them to great mentors, and we give them right now it's like 300 hours of courses with really top-notch experts, and if we were not there, they would not have that, and they would never be able to access that on their own. So it's about creating those links, and how do we create sort of the inclusivity bridges that make it so that people who don't have access get to realize their potential. And I think that's when the world's really going to change, because we're going to see people with very different perspectives, with very different lives, who realize projects, and that's really important. And I saw a question up there about teaching entrepreneurship. It's a very good. I think that we should have free, universal entrepreneurship education for everybody. Aside from income. But because I think that in the future, we're all going to be entrepreneurs, right? We're all going to have to recreate our jobs 10 times, work on our own, etc. But you know, how do you become an entrepreneur? Where do you get the entrepreneurship education? If you're a refugee, if you're a woman like the people we help, if we didn't exist, you know, and I always ask myself that question, and how many people are we leaving on the side? How many people are not realizing their project because they don't have that access?
Okay, we're going to be having a little bit of a reality check here. I mean, not that what we're talking about is not reality, but but the issue here, a great comment here is, yes, Chiara was saying how it was very difficult for her to find money to push forward these projects. And also Nicola was highlighting the fact that having women involved creates economic value. But now, the question we have here is, how can inclusive entrepreneurship be a priority when business schools teach entrepreneurship through the limited frame of profit maximizing? I mean, is this really profit maximizing, or are you, clinking up a great deal of expenses with you don't know where this is headed, right? I mean, how can we assure people that this is the right direction, people? People have the right to inclusive entrepreneurship, right? I mean, Ape, do you feel strongly about this?
No. I don't feel, I know. There's a big difference. When we started looking at 2013, so I've been involved in entrepreneurial thinking and education and training and all that coaching since early 90s, okay? And I have great friends like Steve Blank who've been doing, research, what is a startup and blah, 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 all this. So I've looked at research, Saraswati's, how does effectuation work? So science is there. But there was no curriculum that was simple. So we had to, when we started building, we had to create a new curriculum, a new content. It's now a course available to all for free. I won't name the address, but it's Founder 101, and it contains the basic components that you require to become an entrepreneur. It lets you to self-assess. Is this something I'd like to do or not? And if you're happy with it, and if you want to go on, then you sort of like understand, you know what you should look for. One thing. Content isn't there. So there isn't actually. Everybody in the entrepreneurial environment, including the universities where I teach every now and then, if you go to the entrepreneurial course and look at what they teach, look at the publishing dates of those books, and you look at your calendar, then you understand that there's like a mismatch, okay? So the content is old-fashioned. People don't have a clue what is happening. If you go into startup events, everybody thinks that in startup events there's guys in hoodies. Now, yes, they may be there in hoodies and wearing sneakers, but there's great people with great experience in those ecosystems, with a huge background. So I'm saying all this does it work is a part of the problem that I addressed earlier. The causality of looking backward and trying to shape and build the future based on the past does not work. Does not work. And that's the issue with policymakers, with investors, with financiers, with NGOs. I have great friends running world's best programs. For example, Ready School in Germany. You know, Mark Zuckerberg has been there. Everybody says, wow, they teach the refugees to code and wonderful. We do stuff like that. Ask me, where do I get my funding? From my shareholders. Ask Anne, who is writing those applications to foundations, to get the funding for her to run that eager, meager little school. Nobody gives money because we can't prove that it works. And that's the challenge. It works, but only because people with bright eyes and believing in, we see it through the work of what we do. We enable people to become the people to build their dreams.
Yes, Nicola.
The questions around entrepreneurship education and university entrepreneurship courses, I think the framing is half of the challenge. Entrepreneurship isn't a course you do to learn so you can have a career as an entrepreneur. It is not a career, it is a calling. And entrepreneurship is a mindset. Entrepreneurial thinking is a mindset that you can apply whether you start your own business, work in someone else's startup, or frankly work in a huge organization where you're trying to disrupt and change from within. We need to look at how we develop an entrepreneurial mindset for a very changing future of work. But don't think that we need to create 1 million founders. The world doesn't need 1 million founders. We need people collectively coming together. But we do need a community of people who are founders of great ideas and who work and collaborate and join to make those ideas a reality. And I think that's where there's a difference between what you might learn or read about or the coursework that you would do in a school or a university versus the curriculum that we build in programs and in accelerators. Our entire curriculum, the 156 model that we use at Blue Chili, is around literally a room full of Post-it notes that this started with. The 156.
Or what is it, 156?
The 156 program is our the model of our accelerator, and we also have the online components through our Startup U. What this program is built out of is a group of entrepreneurs sitting in a room 4 years ago and saying, why are all the reasons startups fail? 90% fail in the first 12 months in that valley of death. And how do you write a process for all of those? And how do you then work through those challenges with people throughout an accelerator program to avoid those failures? And that is the kind of real life training. It's not an education. It's actually training and coaching and expertise that you can take people through, recognizing that also every startup journey is different. There are individualities within what happens because of the talents and skills or experience of a single founder. There are hidden talents and skills and knowledge in every founder as well that it's about trying to unearth. And having a model that does that is important, and one that then can sustainably show results. I mean, to your point, if you can demonstrate then that you're building successful companies, then the funding comes to drive that. And we've certainly seen that, where we've been very fortunate to have major corporates in Australia and in venture funding investing in this program and the founders who are going through it, because we can show those outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, Chiara, do you have a comment on this?
So we're talking about entrepreneurship and whether we're teaching profit maximization in the beginning. And I think like working with 2 business schools here in France and being exposed to the entrepreneurship education environment, that is not how entrepreneurship is being taught. It's being taught more through a sort of lean startup model where you're finding the problem, you're addressing it, you're validating your solutions, etc. And that's how we teach it as well. I think that probably comes when you're looking for funding or later on, or pressure maybe from venture capitals, etc. But I do not think that is how entrepreneurship is being taught.
So just to kind of follow up on that. I agree with you that I think the majority of entrepreneurship is not being taught through that model at all, and it's being taught through a profit and different, lean startup and things like that. But I do think that we do have some thought leaders that are finally gaining consciousness of the problem, and I think Y Combinator is probably a great example. They have recently started teaching and promoting diversity a lot, and I think some of it has to do with a certain Silicon Valley company that has been struggling a lot with women in their organization. I will not name who they are, but you can probably guess. And I think that as a result of kind of the backlash that that company has gotten, a lot of, and we've seen lawsuits in the US as well from different venture funds and different companies. I think people are starting to gain a consciousness about it. I think it's probably for the wrong reasons. But I think the minute we can start to kind of link profitability and diversity and really show that they both kind of head in the same direction because they're not uncorrelated, that will be the moment that everybody will benefit.
The impact, I think, having correlation between profitability, diversity, and impact is really important. To your point, we don't want to just see the same again being created over and over. It's when we invest in ideas that are solving problems worth solving, and we bring people with passion and purpose into that space rather than someone who just wants to come up with an idea that makes a bunch of money.
Yes, right. We have about 20 minutes left in this session, and I want to specifically address some of the other questions that we have. Yes, so please put them up so that we can get to them before we wrap up this session. Now, the one that I want to draw your attention to now is, what habits should women develop to address the confidence gap that we mentioned before, that Nicola mentioned, right? And so that they can become bold risk takers in the workforce. So Nicola, what habits? What are your habits? You seem like a bold risk taker.
Yes. First of all, I would love to address the question is the framing of the question. What's been presented there is a question about how do we fix women? How do we change their habits to make them more confident? Now, absolutely, we need to look at how we build, and I think there is a great focus, and we have a great focus in building that confidence through supporting and showcasing and developing skills. But it's also about understanding that the way we look for confidence can actually be seen as an unconscious bias. So before we sat down and watched the top 20 pitches to select 10 into the She Starts program, our judging panel went through unconscious bias training to specifically call out the incorrect correlation that is often made between confidence and competence. We think that the most charismatic speaker in the room, the person who can stand up here like me with a microphone, is definitely going to be the best entrepreneur. Not necessarily. How do you assess the idea and the potential and then work to build that confidence that will overcome an unconscious bias, but not ensure that that person misses out in the first place simply because they're not confident? How do we address this at a more macro level? That's called social change, and the fact that confidence, it should be seen as something you do want to build. The reason why women often lack confidence is because it is knocked out of them from every year that they get older, through childhood right the way through until they become an adult. Confidence is something that, in the sense of the whole concept of don't speak up, wait your turn, don't be too loud, don't be too obvious, how do you make yourself look smaller? These are challenges that many women face, and a lot of the work that Chiara would no doubt be able to speak to. There are many social factors that affect people's confidence, and particularly women, and therefore we should be attacking those social factors, not the women themselves.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I say something about that?
Absolutely.
So this is something that I really, really believe in, and 1/3 of our program is personal development. And I think, I was giving a talk to a bunch of managers, and they asked me, well, we want to motivate them to be brave. And this was all older men. And they're like, we want to motivate them to be brave. So we want to tell them that if they're brave, they're going to be happy. And I said, it's the other way around, actually. If you're happy and you're satisfied with yourself, then you will find the opportunities, and you will be brave, and you will get what you want. So I think that it all starts with ourselves, right? And I think this is why I don't like this term of self-confidence, because we made a whole industry out of making women more self-confident. And I think And I think it's not self-confidence, it's self-knowledge. It's knowing what you are. And if you ask me how I become more self-confident, no, I've grown into myself. And I think that's very different. So if women know who they are, what their purpose is, what they're doing, they will have that confidence, you know, and they don't need to buy 20 books to acquire it. So sorry for any coaches.
Yes, okay. Alpe, do you have a comment or no?
Yeah.
You do?
I always
Okay. He's burning with a comment.
I actually, yeah, I wanted to step away. I'm looking at the skills of entrepreneurship and what does a startup and what should we, you know, say to a young person, not a woman, a young person who's...
You're reading the questions. We're there.
Yeah.
Wow, excellent. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm like 85 years old, but I can still, you know, yeah. With glasses.
So
now
as
I
was,
can't see anything.
yeah, as I was saying, we
Yeah.
have a great audience with
Yeah.
great questions.
The entrepreneurship is about doing something that nobody has done before. In Finland, where I come from, with the Finnish engineers, you know, they think that they can solve every problem, so they look at problem, they look at their skills and ability and build a solution, and that is then this. Technology and technical skills is one thing. They exist. Like, you know, within the boundaries of science, you know, things will be done. Time machine will be built because it's within the realm of science. But entrepreneurship is more about, there's different types of, and we're talking about startups, we're talking about scalable. So Steve Blank, 6 types of entrepreneurs, you know, look at the way the companies, they're different. So there might be a corner shop. Somebody, you know, a farmer is an entrepreneur. It isn't a scalable startup, right? Now, it's a sellable startup. That's also different because if you want to sell it, you need to, you have an exit target. Like if you start a pizza delivery company, you might think that you want to sell it because you don't want to, you know. So you have to sort of like, somebody should talk to these people, and these people, the dreamers, if they see something that hasn't been done, it would be meaningful to do. Now in my talks, I have this white screen where there's nothing. Most of the people look at it and say, nah, there's nothing on the screen. An entrepreneur says, wow, there's nothing. That's a blank canvas. I can start sketching.
Or a lean canvas.
That's a cool thing. That person is an entrepreneur. Yeah. So the number of scalable, sellable startup entrepreneur founders is like this small. Like 2.5% of the population at tops. Most of them will fail because they dream things that haven't been done before. And blah, blah. The rest of the crowd should appreciate and understand what that founding process is. What is the process of building the team, joining a team, not being the Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs or whoever is at the front, but, you know, actually joining and supporting and having that. As my friend Ilkka Paananen is the CEO of Supercell. He wants to highlight himself as a least powerful CEO of the world. And I find it, you know, it's adorable. He's a great guy. The company is really cool. And his approach towards power is absolutely astonishing. And that kind of, so entrepreneurship is about understand the courage to see a vision and then acquiring the skills to build it. The skills not just within yourself, but around you. And especially the people you build around yourself, the people you find, come and let's build this together. This thing here, well, you know, sorry, she's married. Yeah, so it's like that skill is something that the great teams build great things. And that's entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is not about doing things alone, but more important is to get the team to work together to a shared goal. So the whole society should become entrepreneurial. We have societies to save. We should build societies that are worth saving. Or if they're not, then make better societies. We're all entrepreneurs in our societal world.
Agree, I agree. Even if you're working for a media company like myself, I believe that you need that entrepreneurial mindset, whatever you're doing. Now, Roxanne, can I address this question to you? We had a question about what is the one advice that you would give a young woman thinking of starting a startup? You know, there are 101 advices that you could give, but that one advice through your own experience.
So I don't ever give advice to a gender. I give advice to a young person who wants to start a
Okay,
company.
fair
It's the
enough.
same for men and it's the same for women. So I have 3 pieces of advice that I tend to give. The first one is actually, and I think we've talked about it quite a bit, is that we don't all need to be founders. And I think that we're going to have too many founders in a few years and we're going to get rid of a lot of them, and that's going to be quite sad. But I think probably a lot of people think I need to be an entrepreneur. What should I do? Test it with a project. And that's something that I've done. I've actually never started a startup myself, but I've started a media company, I've started a nonprofit, I've launched conferences, I've done things like that. And that kind of helped me build my network and gain exposure to different topics and what have you. This first piece of advice is to start a project. And actually, I encourage people to do it while they can, which usually means be in school. You can afford to lose money and waste time and that kind of thing. The second piece of advice I would say is to go abroad, actually. So I benefited a lot by leaving Silicon Valley. A lot of people think you have to go the other way. I think gaining kind of exposure to a new ecosystem and developing a new network only makes you stronger. So it doesn't mean you have to go and live in another country, but for example, people tend to do conferences in their home country, home city. Go somewhere else, meet new people. That tends to be quite beneficial. And the third piece of advice tends to be around tech and code, because it's very trendy and that's what people should learn now. But I also do believe that it is kind of the business language of the future, not for us all to become developers, but to understand a minimum. And I think probably especially to women in the room who tend to look at tech and go, just getting an introduction would make you a lot more confident and a lot more strong in the workplace.
Yes, Roxanne, I will take that third advice myself. I will do that. Yes. Nicola, do you have something to, I'm sure you have something to add to this as well. Advice for young people, not including young women.
God, I think that's actually a really, like, it can be a really dangerous question, right? Giving advice, this blanket advice to young people when, through my previous work with the Foundation for Young Australians, it was often the young people who gave me the best advice. And indeed, when I look at, I'm very close with my nieces and nephews, and when I speak to them and I hear from them about what their experiences of the world are and the way they see the world, that's when I learn the most. So I think while I could give a million different hot tips on things you might want to think about to build an entrepreneurial mindset or to create a startup or to make an impact in the world, I think that the best advice to all of us is to also look for the insights and the knowledge and that fresh ways of thinking. If startups and innovation is all about looking at problems that have often existed for years from a completely different new lens, then why not also tap into the minds and the ingenuity and that pure creativity that can exist in our younger generations?
Yes, Chiara.
I think I would probably ask the person, man or woman, a question, and that's, why are you doing it? Because if I look back at everything, at all my failed projects, everything that I didn't do, is a really long list. Everything that I didn't do, it's because I didn't know why, that I didn't follow through with. It was because I didn't know why I was doing it in the first place. And it's the same thing that goes to those really successful startups are the ones who have that strong sense of purpose, who know why they're going through, because it's going to be really, really hard. And when you do have that purpose, then it's like, you know, you just drive through everything.
And rather than advice, then perhaps it's just the insight to know that the realities of being an entrepreneur, it's not glamorous. So do something that you love. That's the insight rather than the advice, is do something that you love. Find that thing that you're passionate about. And I would put a qualifier on that often comes up, which I recognize that in our society, which is very unequal, not everyone has the opportunity to do what they love. Some people just need to survive, and I think that's an important thing that we do need to consider. And from a policymaker standpoint, how do you change that?
All right. Is She Starts only for Australian nationals?
So the program launched last year. It was an Australian program for people living in Australia, and we actually, one of our startup founders is from Macedonia. She'd immigrated to Australia, but people who are living residents in Australia. But certainly there are potential opportunities for the program to apply in other locations, and we're always looking at where we can make an impact and where there's value in this model being applied in places around the world.
All right. We have a little more than 5 minutes, so I would just like to give you free rein. Last words before we go. Okay, 2 minutes each.
Should we sing something or? I have to come back to me.
Okay.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah.
Don't be shy.
Understanding, and this is part of I'm a part of another OECD group, a great forum of education industry leaders. So it's an OECD Global Education Industry Forum. I hope I'm going to be invited still after this statement. We spent 2.5 days in Jerusalem last November talking about addressing big things, important things in the world of education. And me as a Finn, people talked about PISA. What is happening in PISA? Well, I'm telling everybody that the rating of Finland in PISA, this is no secret, is probably going to come down. Because PISA is about measuring things in the past, STEM kind of things that stem from industrial revolution. In Finland, we've integrated entrepreneurship into the core curriculum, international curriculum. So we have entrepreneurship as a core component in all of the subjects that are taught at school, from kindergarten all the way to high school, because the world needs to become entrepreneurial. We also need to focus on the world. The majority of the population that defines our future, our shared destiny, lies in the sub-Saharan Africa. If we fail at solving that, we've failed. Entrepreneurial thinking should be at the heart of creating the societies of the future, because we do not know. The only thing we know about the future is we do not know what it's going to bring. Open mind, creating decision-making mechanisms that are all-inclusive, forward-looking, and proactive, including a framework of values, ethics, morale that is humane. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Right. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, Nicola? I'll give you a minute.
Oh,
We're running out of time.
Sure. The one thing I would say is that the question has been asked, what is the ROI on inclusivity? I think it's not rocket science that if we are going to create great ideas in the world, if we are going to see true diversity tapped into and the value of diversity being tapped into, then we have to design a more inclusive environment for people to explore entrepreneurship and to come up with those ideas and to turn them into truly impactful companies. The ROI is we can't thrive and succeed as a global economy, let alone as a society, if half of our population is missing out on the action. And that's why we really need to tackle that as an issue. And stories, finally, are a really important part of that. And seeing the stories of people who are doing things differently and who look different to the next person are a really essential part of making that change.
So, I think that part of entrepreneurship starts with unleashing your own potential and understanding yourself. And I think that's the base of it. And that's a long journey that I've come through. And that I've seen so many women entrepreneurs feel so far away from what we've exposed a lot, which is all these really big, huge success stories that look really far away. And it looks like they did everything the right way, in like 2 weeks. So I kind of, in recent weeks, it has really, really bothered me, because I said, why am I doing things wrong? Because it's so difficult for me and it's not for other people. And I realized that I was not alone. And so, you know, I've been just as practice for myself. I launched this blog. I haven't told anybody about it. And basically, I'm recording how I'm becoming an entrepreneur every day. So I will take something that happens in my day, and it can be like my neighbor bringing me a strawberry tart, and I learn something, and then I apply that to entrepreneurship. And it's that thing that, you know, we're becoming and we're growing every day, because it's so hard to see when you're an entrepreneur, and that so many people got discouraged. So yeah, I'm loving it, and I have so much gratitude, so much more gratitude than I did before for how far I've come and how much I've evolved. And I think, you know, we should all have that. So.
Yeah, Chiara is in a good place. Thank you, Chiara. And Roxanne, why don't we wrap up with you then?
Okay, so I guess there's pressure now. No, I think probably the message that I want to leave people with in the room is actually that there are more women in tech than just Sheryl Sandberg and Marissa Mayer. And
by the way, you look like Sheryl Sandberg.
Do I? Thank you
little
so
bit.
much. I will be telling Sheryl. She'll not be pleased. I just want people to know that, because with the nonprofit that I founded, Start Her, every year we try to highlight 10 women that are not Sheryl Sandberg and Marissa Mayer that you should know about. And I think also all of us in the room can contribute to that. If we just keep putting the same 2 names forward, it looks really pathetic. And I think there's so many more women out there, and not just women, but just terrific entrepreneurs from various backgrounds. And if you can educate yourselves and help promote that message, it's going to help everybody. So I think that's probably what I'll leave people with.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think over the last hour and 20 minutes, we've had a very comprehensive look at what inclusive entrepreneurship is all about, and what some of the experiences from our great panel, how we can use some of that to benefit our own lives, whether we are entrepreneurs or not. I want to thank our excellent panel, and I want to thank all of you, our excellent audience members, for the wonderful questions and for being so attentive this morning. Thank you very much.